Hello, Robs. We're back with Anyone's Son, a true story by Roberta Roche with Harry De La Roche Jr. Harry has just been sentenced to life, 4 counts of first-degree murder in Rahway State Prison, Chapter 14. Section 40. When we arrived at Rahway State Prison, still handcuffed and legs shackled in pairs, we were taken inside to be stripped and searched. Then we were sized for clothes. Outside, the prison didn't look too bad with its trees and low privet hedge, and somewhere I'd heard that once upon a time the slate-like dome that topped the sand-colored stone building had been the third largest dome in the world. Inside, I saw there were 4 cell blocks that extended from the circular structure underneath the dome. These cell blocks house inmates and offices, plus visiting and hospital facilities. The prison is overcrowded, though, so overcrowded, in fact, that a trailer park of 18 trailers is used for specially screened minimum custody inmates. Most of the time, the inside is both dismal and damp, except for the overpowering heat we have to endure in the summer. On the day of my arrival, an officer conferred with me and asked me if I'd like to be placed in protective custody. "You know this place better than I do," I said. "What would you advise?" "Protective custody," he answered. So off I went to PC, which was on the 4th floor. Once up there, I was put into a cell that measured approximately 10 feet by 6 feet. This first cell, number 210, consisted of 2 school desks, a bed, sink, and toilet. A little later, I received the clothes for which I'd been measured, plus boots, a bowl, utensils, and a garbage pail. Again, I was in a windowless cell, but the corridor in front of the cells has windows on the other side, so during the time you're out of your cell, you can look out and see the road that passes the front of the jail. Many of the PC inmates hang their laundry by these windows to dry. The big thing on my mind in prison has been the pending appeal and the hope I have for this. While I was still in Yardville, John filed a notice of motion for a new trial. This notice, the first legal procedure for appealing the verdict, stated that John would make application to the Bergen County Court to grant me a new trial because of legal errors in my first one. According to the law, John had to seek this new trial from the trial judge in the county court before any conviction could be appealed to the appellate division of the Superior Court. The latter is a 3-judge court, and this court can either overturn my 4 first-degree murder convictions or turn down the appeal. If the judges rule against me unanimously, or 2-1, John will have to go to the state Supreme Court. If they rule in my favor, the state will go to the Supreme Court. By the time John submitted a brief in support of a motion for a new trial and asked Judge Madden to grant this trial on the grounds of the legal errors that were made, we'd learned an interesting tidbit. This came in the form of an after-the-trial phone call to John's office from John Fitzpatrick, a Montvale teacher in the system I attended. In this call, Fitzpatrick said he regretted he hadn't come forward and spoken up sooner. But after the verdict, his conscience made him feel he must tell John that just about 4 days after the murders, he had met Captain John Hanna, and Hanna told him I'd been a suspect right from the start on November 28, 1976. John got an affidavit from the teacher and presented it as new evidence, and another argument that my constitutional rights had been violated that day. In his motion for a new trial, John claimed that Judge Madden should not have permitted into evidence my 2 statements to police. He contended again that my constitutional rights were violated. He also said I was deprived of a fair trial because the statements to police were read into evidence by Detective O'Donovan and Investigator Frank Del Preet. John also contended he should have been allowed to introduce family letters because they would have supported an insanity defense. In addition, he stated the court should have declared a mistrial because members of the sequestered jury were permitted to have contacts with members of their family in an uncontrolled atmosphere. After a hearing on this in March, Judge Madden denied John's motion and rejected his contention that new evidence had been discovered and that legal errors were made during the trial. He said that Fitzpatrick's statement could have impeached Captain Hanna's testimony, but he felt the statement was not sufficient to warrant a new trial, and he regarded this affidavit as rather weak. During the arguments, Richard Salkin pointed out that Captain Hanna was never involved in the investigation, but was merely trying to locate Ronnie. Shortly after Judge Madden turned us down on the new trial, John filed a notice of appeal on March 27, 1978, stating I was appealing to the Superior Court of New Jersey. Appellate Division. At this writing, we're waiting on the appeal, and I'm hoping what I call an injustice will be rectified in this court. There were other legal proceedings in March when the investigation into how the Long Island newspaper Newsday obtained and published details of my confession came to the front again. When that story containing actual excerpts from the confession appeared in December 1976, a Bergen County grand jury issued a presentment. I learned at the time that a presentment is a reprimand which does not involve criminal charges. After the presentment, Judge Troutwain ordered the document sealed until the end of the trial. As a result, the leak was hushed up till March 1978, when Judge Troutwain met with Prosecutor Roger W. Breslin Jr. and Montvale police officers to consider police objections to the presentment. Supposedly, the grand jury presentment was critical of the way the Montvale police handled the confession, and the cops objected to part of the presentment and reportedly wanted the document kept secret. Later, when the report was made public, the grand jury recommended that the Montvale mayor and council discipline Detective Michael O'Donovan for allegedly allowing a reporter to copy the murder confession. The presentment called O'Donovan grossly negligent in permitting the reporter, Kenneth Gross of Newsday, to see and copy the statement I made. 13 latent fingerprints taken from O'Donovan's copy of the confession were identical to Gross's. Later, the Montvale mayor and council defended O'Donovan, and after discussing the report, chose not to act. The mayor indicated the council would seek some type of light disciplinary action at the regular council meeting. After that, I understand the entire matter was completely hushed up, with a token slap on the hand. As those things go on in that other world beyond these prison bars, I try to exist as well as I can while I wait for my appeal. I'm determined not to allow myself to become like some of the inmates, and I'm trying to maintain enough self-respect to remember the person I might have been if this whole thing hadn't happened. I still keep everything inside and show no emotions here, but the people who say I have no emotions weren't there when I went to the green room in Bergen County Jail. They weren't there at the Montvale headquarters when I cried while I was alone, and they weren't by the graves in the cemetery when I said my goodbye to my family. I'm not a cold, heartless bastard, and a lot of people know it, though here, as everywhere else in my life, people have mixed opinions about me. I've heard that some of the inmates say I'm very antisocial, and I guess it bothers some of them that I hardly come out of my cell. Sometimes I come out as little as only 8 times a week, but I like to be alone in my cell. I can't really help it if some people say I remind them of a bear in hibernation. I also get the word sometimes that some people think I'm arrogant and living in a fantasy world in order to forget my problems and cope with where I am. Sometimes this place does get to me, and I feel alone and helpless. In fact, I wrote Tink Thompson one day that if I tend to sound flaky sometimes, I may be getting terminal nerves. I often get down on being in here, knowing how few people believe me, and it really surprised and hurt me when one of my friends revealed he thought I was really guilty, but that he was still behind me. Lots of time it's a zoo in here. it's easy to get depressed, especially with the racial bull and the homosexual advances. I still have a will to survive, so I try to hold my own. My cell is drab and dreary and painted a neutral shade, and my bed with its sheet and blanket dominates one wall. A basin for washing and a toilet with a cardboard box top for a cover take care of another wall. The third has 2 foot lockers which hold most of my belongings. I use them as a table for some of my stereo equipment. My stereo was sent down from the Greers, and I also have a TV. I have no chair or mirror, and my rug is a piece of cloth. The only thing that looks like home is my familiar blue bathrobe that hangs in a corner of the cell. While I'm locked in my cell, I watch TV and listen to radio and stereo music that ranges from mellow to hard rock. I also read and write letters, and I think an awful lot. Sometimes, very occasionally, I go out of my cell to play cards. Most of the time, it's boring as hell, and I'm unable to get a job while in the PC wing. In the future, I hope to take college courses that are given through Edison College. But until I can arrange this, I don't know what I'll take. By September 1978, there were occasional rumors I might be sent from Rahway to Yardville Correction Center, but there were also ongoing rumors that I would be moved to general population, something that I dread very much, because I fear for my life. One day I'd hear that a special committee was voting me out of PC. Then the next day I'd get the measure I wouldn't be moving right away. As I understand it, an inmate who is signed into PC is not supposed to leave it until he signs himself out. If this is the case, I won't sign a release. I feel a lot safer here. In September, I also turned 20, and I got 8 birthday cards. The first came from Roy Nelson. Then later, the care committee from my church sent me a birthday package from its voluntary love collection. Tink Thompson sent me a food package too. Tink also sent a nothing book in which she'd written an assortment of little sayings and poems. She's a friend, sister, and confidant, and her thoughtful gift meant so much to me. I sat right down and wrote her, "Dear Tink, thank you for your words of friendship, love, and wisdom. I may not be able to write like that, but I'm sure you know how I feel toward you. Thank you for being there when I needed a friend and a shoulder to cry on. You are many things to me, and I'll never be able to put into words how special you are to me, but I think you know." As I sit alone in my cell, my thinking covers everything from chocolate Oreo cookies and barbecued potato chips to how I can help my appeal. I know that I shot my brother, and there was a reason for it, and I also feel a sense of guilt for the 3 deaths I didn't cause since I didn't talk to Ronnie, and I try to do what I could. But whether there was a reason or not, I'll never forget that night, and the days and nights ever since. I haven't grown bitter at the verdict. It wasn't the jury's fault. In fact, I don't hold anything against anyone connected with the trial. But I do have unanswered questions about some things that happened. So when I'm thinking about them, I ask again and again, what about the Montvale detective who leaked my confession to the press and then only had his hand slapped? How about the other 2 Montvale cops who told conflicting stories on the witness stand and who got no charges or reprimands? Why did it take so many months for the state to start checking the evidence? Why were there contradictory statements to law officers on the evidence? Why didn't they check out the type A and type O blood in my brother's hands? Why didn't both Ronnie and I get a paraffin test, even though the police said at the trial they didn't want to give me the test? I could describe the equipment because it was sitting in front of me before I was taken to the police station. Why didn't the prosecutor's office check the body hair and the clothes they say I wore and the clothes they say Ronnie wore? They knew well in advance what I was going to say in court, and I believe they had hair samples from both Ronnie and me, but they didn't bring this up in court. I'd also like to know why the doctor said my mother was never ill with cancer when the family doctor once said she had it, when she went through several operations, when she gave up smoking because of this scare, and when she mentioned her cancer in a letter to me. Why didn't the police follow up on the person I talked to at Maximus? When they had the name and address in my wallet, why didn't they check out my story? With him. The first time I saw the address again was when I saw my wallet in court. Why were sequestered jurors allowed to go to an inn in South Jersey and talk to their families during the trial? And why didn't the defense know about it before the visit took place? I get a respite from my thoughts, though, through visitors in my mail, although the visitors who come here add up to a handful of people. John Taylor comes to confer with me, and I see him in a special cell reserved for visits with attorneys. The Greers, as my nearest relatives, have monthly contact visits, and I'm also permitted to telephone them on a weekly basis. Other visitors must come on weekends to a regular visiting area with the usual mesh between us. My church keeps me on its prayer chain, and I get its bulletins each week from a woman who has written to me from the time I went to jail. On the second Thanksgiving after the deaths, I received a beautiful Thanksgiving card signed by many church members. I wrote a thank you immediately that was read in church the next Sunday. And I told the people it was nice to know that there was someone out there, particularly at a time of year when it's always especially lonely. I also telephoned the Greers between Thanksgiving and November 28th. And when we talked about my family and mentioned memories, I said, I don't know whether I've told you before, but I'm glad that you're both out there. The people who write me letters help me tolerate prison life. And though the mail keeps showing up, those who continue to write me realize how lonely I get. I live through other people, so I always wish for more mail, especially from people my age, who are busy doing the kind of things I'd normally be doing now. A lot of people ask me, what should I write about? And I answer, write about yourself and what you do every week. I see the outside world through their eyes, which is why I'm so grateful for mail. Some of the very best letters I get are those that come from Chris Green, one of the strangers who wrote me at the end of my trial. Chris is 3 months older than I, and through him, I've been introduced to others who write me from South Carolina. Chris has a sixth sense that comes to him in prophetic dreams, and even though some may scoff at this and wonder whether Chris is for real or a fantasy I've dreamed up, he is a very real person, and other persons, in addition to Chris, have vouched for the dreams he has. In one dream about a friend, he saw a car crash that happened 4 days later. In another, he saw one of his friends standing in black by a tombstone inscribed November 11th. 2 months later, on November 11th, this woman's young son died. Chris described his dreams about me in the following letter. This is interesting. Dear Harry, how I came to believe in you and your story started a lot of years ago when a wise and loving black-haired woman who was old enough to be my grandmother made 6 predictions for my future when she came to me in a dream. The third prediction was the most important. It was, within 4 days following a major holiday, you'll hear a name. It won't mean anything at first. Then the name will stick in your mind. It will be the name of a northerner who will look guilty, but he'll be innocent. You should trust your first instinct. Now let me go to November 28th, 1976, when I heard a news report. That was the first time I heard your name. The report said you were from New Jersey, and that fulfilled these predictions. The one about being a northerner and the one about 4 days following a holiday. I think then I said to myself, probably coincidence, but your name stuck in my mind. And as I moved on to other things, later, the dream that brought your name back into my conscious thoughts came in December 1977 when I had a dream about a young man on trial. Later, I read in the papers that your trial was just starting in Hackensack, New Jersey. As I followed the trial, the same dream recurred several times, and it was always the same. It was like I was an observer in the courtroom, but my presence seemed invisible. The jury came back in from deliberation, and the 4 women stood. It was like I could see inside the young man's mind. He said over and over to himself, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. Then guilty, guilty rang out in the courtroom. The young man was led away without showing any emotion. Finally, about 3 days before the end of the trial, I decided to try and write you. I didn't know where to start except for your name and Hackensack, New Jersey. A little over a month later, I got your reply. You said it felt good to know I believed you. Now that we correspond regularly, I truly believe we're friends. And I believe in your innocence without doubt. I care about what happens to you, and I'm going to stand behind you. Your friend, Chris Green. I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone how much the letter means and how often I think of the circumstances that prompted Chris to write. My grandmother Greer loved the eerie and stories such as this, and I wonder about the coincidence of the woman who came to Chris, the wise, black-haired, loving woman who was old enough to be his grandmother. It's a perfect description of Grandma Greer, but he couldn't have known about her since she died in 1970. As I come to the end of this part of my story, I wonder about the plan for my life and what will happen next. I believe in God and Jesus, and I think about getting out. I still have faith in justice, too, so I'd like to say, as my final statement, as I've said so often before, that I have no guilty memories of committing 3 of the murders. I have a picture in my mind of what happened November 28th. To me, the picture will always be there. To me, that's the way that it is. And that's the end of the book proper, and then the epilogue will be read after I eat cereal because I'm hungry. All right, bros. Goodbye. Good boy.